You all know what they say. You can take the mob-like actors out of the president's orbit, but you can't take the president out of his mob-like comfort zone. Donald Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, who's now a convicted felon, was in court today in New York facing state charges for fraud. These images were likely on the TV sets of at least a few of the attendees of the G20 summit, and the images possibly seen by leaders preparing to meet with Donald Trump. And it's not like Trump didn't have his work cut out for him already. There's nothing quite like coming back from the brink of nuclear war with Iran to remind you just how much the United States needs its allies these days. Last week was a wake-up call, and since then, doubts about America's credibility and the president's judgment have persisted. In that regard, the G20 summit arrives at a perfect time, a chance for Trump to reassure our allies face-to-face, right? Nah. Instead, it seems like he decided to go in a different direction, attacking our country's geopolitical allies ahead of the summit, specifically Germany, India, and the host country, Japan, three countries whose leaders Trump will meet with on Friday. But he'll also be meeting with Vladimir Putin tomorrow. So far, no tough talk directed at him. Same thing goes for Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. No insults directed at the leader recently accused by the United Nations of likely orchestrating the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Trump has a breakfast date with him set for Saturday. And that's special. Ashley Parker, White House reporter for The Washington Post, joins us. Ashley, your paper and The Times doing some bang-up reporting about yet another turn on the world stage where our allies get the cold shoulder and our adversaries get the warm fuzzies.
Yeah, at this point, it is still surprising when we sort of see his comments and his insults before he lands, but it shouldn't be. Because as we've seen time and time again, you mentioned, it would be a perfect opportunity for the president to reassure our allies, but that is never what the president does. The president does the exact opposite, and then someone like Vice President Pence or, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is sort of sent over to be a reassurer in chief, and often, in the case of Tillerson at least, that prompts the president's ire. But if you sort of take the president's general rules of behavior and apply them on the world stage, we've talked a lot about how the president sort of admires and appreciates dictators and strongmen, and even just with his own aides and his own peer group, he seems to almost resent people or look down on people who seem to need something from him. Or want something, or, he demands absolute loyalty, but then when people provide it, he sort of sneers at them. And so allies are people who need something and want something from the United States. They want to work with us. And you see him not really respecting that. But people like Xi and Putin and the Saudi leader, he is more than happy to sort of be not as critical of them as just about everyone in the world would like to see him be.
Ashley, there's also some reporting about his enthusiasm to reset relations with Putin post-Mueller. What do you know about that?
I mean, I think in general, the president is very reticent to criticize Putin and Russia. And it's worth noting that there's actually some real disagreement that even Trump himself has noted between our country and Russia. But because of Mueller, because of that report, because it gets to sort of his key insecurity and vulnerability, which again is the legitimacy of his election, there's sort of this barrier he can't cross where he feels like if he confronts Putin on Iran or the Ukraine, it somehow gives legitimacy to his critics who say that Russia helped him win and steal the election. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. But if past is any indicator, he's much more likely to be more flattering, more fawning with Putin and come out and saying, I take his word. He told me he did nothing wrong. And, I'm inclined to believe him.
Jen, I'm inclined to believe everything Ashley Parker just said. And let me play Trump making a similar point. This is the president on his meeting with Putin.
I'll have a very good conversation with him. What I say to him is none of your business. Go ahead.
What I say to Vladimir Putin is none of your business, but I'm going to live tweet everything else I do.
Oh my God. So, Ashley had such a good point about the disdain that he holds for people who need something for him. But Trump, Putin is something he needs Trump needs him. I think that this is like one consistent thing in his candidacy and his presidency is he will always back Putin up. And I think we tend to overthink why that is. I think it's because Putin's got something on him and he needs Putin to protect him. Every time, from the campaign where he was took a different position on NATO than any Republican presidential nominee ever had, to Helsinki, to this day when he tells the American people it's none of our business what he has to say to a semi-hostile power and a great world power. It's none of our business. I think that's why.
At some point, we have to admit that these countries aren't our allies anymore, because allyship is built on a personal trust relationship with the President of the United States. He has ended our allied relationship with many of the Western powers. They don't trust us. We've known for over a year that they don't want to share security information anymore because they feel that he's basically going to leak it. He has an absolutely hostile relationship with Trudeau. How can you be mad at Trudeau? He has a bad relationship with Lopez Obrador and Mexico. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't have allies anymore because even the nations that he wants to pander to, exactly.
Even MBS are our ally, and they have a great relationship. Jared and MBS are texting.
But these aren't. They're not allies. They're not really allies anymore. These are people who basically just give him sort of a fantasy version of what he wants to be. And that's the real danger that we have to look at, that we are a country without allies. We have frenemies now, and frenemies aren't going to help you if you get attacked.
Yeah, and look, I think getting back to the debate tonight, this is an opportunity where a Democrat can show strength. It's this warped view of the world where Trump thinks it's strong to suck up to the murderers and the despots and the tough guys. Like, for some reason, Trump thinks that makes him strong if he is a poodle for Putin and MBS and, other despots throughout the world, but if he's mean to Trudeau because, he's a French-Canadian guy, right? Like, he thinks that's what makes him strong. There's a way to contrast with that and say, no, actually, that's demonstrating your weakness, that you're not strong enough to say no to a situational ally like MBS when he murders a journalist that writes for a paper in this country. You're not strong enough to stand up to Putin even, when he was willing to, act in your narrow interests during the election. We didn't see any of that last night, and I think that, connected to these meetings today, it's a good opportunity.
Ashley, the president was, I don't know if he was counseled, but there were hopes and aspirations that he wouldn't do much tweeting about the Democratic debate. That lasted, I think, about 26 minutes when he tweeted from aboard Air Force One, I imagine, his color commentary. Any thoughts about how distracted he is by the Democratic primary sort of beginning officially with these 2 nights of debates?
Well, it's worth noting he sent a few tweets, but I think if you hold him to his own standard, he was pretty restrained for himself. But this is definitely something. Yeah, if you hold him to the Trump standard, he was restrained for himself. But this
he did not tweet as often as he does to Fox and Friends. On this, you are technically and statistically accurate.
I was expecting way worse, I do have to say. I thought he was restrained, too.
But he's following this incredibly closely. This is what the president does. He watches TV. He loves an opponent. He now has 20 of them. And I was talking to people after last night's debate, the campaign and people in his orbit, just because of the way the 2 stages were randomly chosen, are more interested in tonight. Last night sort of didn't make them worried about anyone new. So the key people on his mind are Vice President Biden and Elizabeth Warren. And one thing that was interesting, and in last night's debate, they're still worried about Warren. She didn't wildly change how they thought of her. They think she could be compelling, but they also think that if she is the nominee, she will emerge sort of pretty badly damaged by the whole field's shift to the left. But one thing that is worth mentioning very briefly is that they got more worried about Elizabeth Warren when Tucker Carlson on Fox News, which the president watches, he did a segment where he praised Warren's economic policies. And that coincided with a rise in the public polls for her. And that was one of the things that kind of made the campaign wake up and take notice and start to get a little nervous about her.
Ashley Parker, we love when you join us. Thanks for spending some time with us. When we come back,